Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at something pretty seismic, really. A political earthquake that seems to have fundamentally reshaped power across parts of Asia.
Yeah, it's fascinating because for decades, the political structures in South and Southeast Asia seemed, well, almost immovable.
Right, defined by these long-ruling parties, systemic corruption, sort of entrenched authoritarianism.
Exactly. But our sources, the ones we're digging into today, they show this sudden, really powerful shift, a wave of youth-led protests starting around 2022.
And achieving outcomes that, frankly, seemed unthinkable just a few years ago. We're talking about toppling established regimes. Some people are calling it the Asian Spring or maybe the Gen Z revolution.
And it's a compelling narrative because these aren't just isolated flare-ups. Our analysis confirms that. While the countries will focus on Bangladesh, Nepal, Indonesia, they all have their own distinct histories, right?
Of course.
But the underlying drivers, the core issues, they're remarkably similar. You see this relentless corruption, this suffocating nepotism that just locks young people out of opportunity.
Huge economic inequality, too.
Massive inequality, and governments that are increasingly resorting to digital censorship, authoritarian tactics, just to cling to power.
But the key here, the real story, seems to be the catalyst. It's how this happened. It's about Generation Z, isn't it? The first truly digital native generation.
Precisely. It's the way they're using communication tools, digital platforms, and this kind of transnational solidarity to mobilize in ways we haven't quite seen before on this scale.
Exactly. So we're not just looking at, spontaneous anger boiling over. We're looking at highly organized, digitally sophisticated political movements that can pivot almost instantly when the state tries to crack down.
Yeah, the adaptability is key.
So our mission today is a detailed deep dive. We want to compare three of these key uprisings, Bangladesh, Nepal, and then look at Indonesia to understand the regional picture. We'll analyze the catalysts, the specific digital tactics they used, the terrible violence they often faced, and ultimately try to define what makes this new era of digitally native political activism tick.
Okay, let's get into it.
Let's unpack this, starting with what many are calling the world's first true Gen Z revolution, Bangladesh in 2024.
Bangladesh is remarkable. The speed, the scale, but also, as you said, where it started. It seems almost deceptively narrow initially.
Yeah, a dispute over bureaucracy, basically, government jobs.
Yeah.
The protests kicked off June 6, 2024, focusing on restructuring the quota system for government job recruitment.
Right. And to really get why this was so explosive, you need to understand that quota system. It reserves a certain percentage of government jobs for specific groups, families of freedom fighters from the 1971 war, marginalized communities, and so on.
And those quotas had been changed before.
Yes. In 2018, they were largely reformed, many scrapped after student protests back then. The trigger in 2024 was a high court ruling that basically said, no, we're reinstating the pre-2018 quota system.
And why did that hit such a nerve with young people this time?
Well, it directly tapped into this deep well of economic anxiety, of precarity that so many educated young Bangladeshis feel.
Right.
You have a generation that grew up under Sheikh Hasina's 15-year rule, facing really high unemployment rates, and suddenly they see these government jobs they felt they could compete for based on merit being re-reserved.
So they felt like the system was rigged.
Exactly. It looked like privilege and connections trumping qualifications. That specific grievance over quotas just became a lightning rod. It instantly attracted all this much wider discontent about corruption, about the lack of democratic space, about the ruling Awami League's grip on power.
So that specific policy protest just ballooned. It ramped up incredibly quickly into a broader anti-government, pro-democracy movement.
And crucially, it was the state's response that poured fuel on the fire. The escalation point was brutal, the July massacre.
Carried out by government-associated groups, is that right?
Right.
Militias, party loyalists.
Yes, against student protesters, but also hitting civilians. That moment, that extreme violence, it was a critical inflection point. It just shattered any lingering hope among students that gradual reform was possible.
No turning back after that.
Pretty much. If you look at the timeline, the whole thing lasted barely 2 months, early June to August 3rd. But by August 3rd, the movement coordinators organizing through these decentralized digital channels, remember, they had focused all that anger into one single demand.
Non-negotiable.
Totally. The resignation of the Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina, and her entire cabinet, and that was immediately followed by a call for comprehensive non-cooperation, like a nationwide shutdown.
That is astonishingly fast. To go from a quota protest to demanding the government's resignation and achieving it.
And they did achieve it. Just 2 days later, August 5th, 2024. Sheikh Hasina resigns after 15 years in power, flees to India. A power vacuum.
Filled almost immediately by an interim government, led by Muhammad Yunus, the economist, Nobel laureate.
Right. And the new government later even designated August 5th as July Mass Uprising Day, cementing its significance.
That speed, it just highlights the sheer mobilization power we're talking about when Gen Z unites around a focused demand.
It does. But we absolutely have to pause here and consider the cost. The human cost of achieving this was immense. The scale of the violence, the repression, it was staggering.
Yeah, let's slow down for a second. We need to let these figures sink in. What exactly do the sources say about casualties?
The numbers are grim, and they really underscore the lethal force the former regime deployed. The Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, the MOHFW, estimated around 1,650 deaths among the anti-quota protesters.
1,650 protester deaths.
Yeah, with some sources putting the total reported deaths even higher, over 1,500 confirmed across various reports. And injuries. The official figures suggest over 22,000 people injured.
22,000.
And critically, that number includes children. It includes ordinary civilians just caught in the crackdown, people who weren't even protesting.
The specific victim data is chilling too. Journalists, children.
At least 4 journalists killed and 32 children confirmed among the non-protester civilian deaths. It shows how indiscriminate the violence became.
And the government's response wasn't just physical force, was it? They went after the information flow, the digital lifeblood of the movement.
Absolutely. Information warfare. They imposed a nationwide curfew starting midnight, July 19th, deployed troops across the country, and crucially, on July 18th, they hit the kill switch. A nationwide internet blackout.
Not random. Targeted.
Completely targeted, designed specifically to stop the spread of information about the protests, especially those viral images and videos documenting the police brutality, the July massacre as it was happening, trying to break that cycle of outrage and mobilization.
And beyond the killings, what about the tactics used on the ground? What do anecdotal reports tell us?
They paint a picture of widespread, often indiscriminate use of force, both less lethal and lethal weapons. Reports confirmed police using rubber bullets, sound grenades, but also live lethal ammunition.
Rub rounds.
Yes, firearms, pellet shotguns apparently, sometimes aimed directly into peaceful crowds.
Sure.
We also see the sheer rage reflected in property damage. The sources mention the vandalization, the destruction of the Mirpur 10 and Kazipara metro stations in Dhaka.
Significant damage.
Huge. Estimated damages around 500 crore taka. That's roughly, US $41 million. It shows the scale of the unrest, the anger directed at state infrastructure.
Okay, so shifting focus a bit, let's look at the internal political dynamics after the revolution. The sources paint a picture of a country needing deep, deep reform. The previous regime, ruling from 2009 to 2024, characterized by pretty systemic human rights abuses.
Oh, absolutely. That regime had basically institutionalized repression. The data we have is stark. Over its tenure, something like 2,699 extrajudicial killings were documented.
2,699.
And 677 enforced disappearances. People just vanished. And then there is the infamous Ainagor, the House of Mirrors.
A secret detention facility.
More than just a prison. It symbolized the state's power to make citizens disappear without a trace, operating completely outside any legal framework. It was a tool of terror. The sheer volume of these abuses just underscored the authoritarian foundation the students were fighting against.
So the challenge now for the interim government, according to the activists in our sources, it's monumental, isn't it? It's not just about holding new elections.
Not at all. It's about reforming the state itself. Activists are demanding comprehensive institutional reform, judicial reform. They want to dismantle these old colonial-era laws that give the state massive unchecked power.
And address the root causes, like inequality.
Exactly. Tackling entrenched economic inequality.
Yeah.
And there's also this constant pressure, this need to resist the rise of right-wing forces trying to hijack the movement's success for their own agenda. That's a real concern.
Which brings us to a really critical point. The diversity within the movement itself. This uprising needed different groups to work together, didn't it? Religious groups, secular groups.
Yes, it was a broad coalition united against the regime. You had religious student groups like the Bangladesh Islami Chhatra Shibir, or BICS, working alongside more secular, often left-leaning organizations.
How did that coalition hold together given the potential ideological clashes.
Well, it held because the immediate threat, the authoritarian regime under Hisino, was seen as the bigger enemy, outweighing their differences, for the moment anyway.
But those differences are still there.
Oh, absolutely. They're simmering just beneath the surface. Our sources highlight a telling incident involving a queer activist who was apparently quite central to the organizing efforts.
What happened?
This activist faced really severe anti-queer attacks in some media outlets, and while many students reportedly supported their role, the incident just exposed the friction points within this broad anti-authoritarian front.
So even within a successful revolution, marginalized groups can still face backlash.
Definitely. It highlights the inherent dangers when you have coalitions that include socially conservative or religious elements, even when united against a common enemy. Protecting everyone's rights post-revolution is a huge challenge.
Let's talk about messaging, because this is where that Gen Z digital native creativity really comes through. The Prime Minister labeled the protesters Razakars,
Yeah, a hugely loaded term in Bangladesh.
and they just took it and ran with it.
They totally flipped it. It's a classic example of co-option, of digital jujitsu, really. First, you need the context. Razakar refers to the local collaborators who sided with the Pakistani military during the 1971 Liberation War. It's basically the ultimate term for a traitor in Bangladesh.
So the PM was trying to paint them as enemies of the nation.
Exactly. Trying to delegitimize the entire youth movement by linking them to historical betrayal. A very powerful smear attempt.
It backfired.
Completely. Instead of getting defensive, the students immediately adopted these counter slogans, chanting things like, "Who are you? Who am I? A Razakar. A Razakar. Who has said it? Who has said it? The autocrat. The autocrat."
Wow. Turning the insult into a badge of honor.
Precisely. By embracing the state's most potent historical slur, ironically, turning it into this chanted collective identity, they just neutralized its power. They flipped the moral judgment back onto their accuser, the autocrat.
It shows incredible digital fluency, doesn't it? Weaponizing irony like that.
It really does. It subverted the language of power, turned state propaganda into a unifying, defiant rallying cry. A really rapid, sophisticated shift in political communication, all happening in real time, amplified online.
Okay, that analysis of digital counter-messaging, of turning the state's weapons back on itself, that sets the stage perfectly for our next case. Let's move forward a year to 2025 and shift north to Nepal.
Right. Another eruption of youth anger. Similar underlying issues, but maybe an even more direct confrontation over digital space itself.
A digital rebellion, really, sparked by those familiar economic grievances, corruption, nepotism, but defined by this immediate, dramatic digital war with the government.
Yeah.
What were the core drivers simmering beneath the surface in Nepal?
Again, you see that familiar pattern. Pervasive systemic corruption, massive economic inequality, cripplingly high youth unemployment. Nepal's GDP per capita, remember, is incredibly low, under US $1,500.
Yet the elite lifestyle is very visible online.
Painfully visible. Young people see the lavish lifestyles, the privileges of the elite constantly on social media. This fueled huge resentment, perfectly captured by the anger around Nepo trends, children of the elite getting opportunities denied to others.
And activists summed it up well in our sources, didn't they?
Yeah, they said it was fundamentally about demanding jobs, demanding dignity, and rejecting a development model that had just clearly failed the vast majority. Basic needs, basic fairness.
And the government's reaction to this growing online anger was, well, pretty extreme.
Extreme and, you could argue, completely counterproductive. They tried to shut down the conversation by just banning platforms wholesale.
A massive digital ban. What did that involve?
On September 4th, 2025, the government banned 26 social media platforms. A huge sweep. Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, YouTube, Signal, Reddit, all the big ones.
What was the official reason?
Ostensibly, it was about compliance. Failure to register locally, pay taxes, that was the official line.
But critics saw another motive.
Immediately. Critics widely alleged it was just a pretext. A blatant, desperate attempt to stifle the protests against nepotism and elite privilege that were spreading like wildfire online, coordinated digitally.
So trying to digitally isolate the movement, but instead of killing it, it seems like it forced the activists to adapt, right?
Yeah.
Pushing them into maybe darker, more specialized corners of the internet.
Exactly. And this is where Discord comes into the Nepal story. It's another fascinating example of that Gen Z tactical adaptation we talked about.
When the mainstream platforms went dark.
They didn't just give up or go back to printing flyers. They immediately shifted their coordination efforts to the Discord app.
Which is mostly known for gaming communities.
Primarily, yes, or niche tech groups. But it offered key advantages in this situation. It's decentralized, the government probably wasn't monitoring it as closely yet, and its structure with organized channels for specific tasks turned out to be perfect for command and control of a protest movement.
So Discord becomes the central hub, the command center for mobilization, for coordination. How did using that specific platform shape the conversation, the ideology of the protesters?
That's a really interesting point. The platform itself seems to have acted as a kind of political incubator because it was a relatively closed, somewhat niche environment, maybe freer from the sort of moderating influences of mainstream social media or traditional political parties.
The conversations got more radical.
The sources suggest exactly that. Conversations observed on Discord often reflected this deep sense of revolutionary necessity. Young people weren't just talking about policy tweaks, they were questioning the fundamental nature of the Nepali state, rejecting what they called bourgeois constitutionalism.
Meaning they didn't believe the existing system could ever deliver real change.
Precisely. The idea that the current political and economic framework was inherently incapable of delivering genuine equality or justice. That's a significant ideological leap from just protesting corruption or nepotism.
A much deeper critique.
Much deeper. And this radicalization, observed on Discord, was apparently quite different from the more moderate, maybe reformist discussions still happening on platforms like Facebook or Twitter platforms, often used more by older generations or established civil society groups.
And this radicalization included other dimensions too, like social issues.
Yes. The sources note that on Discord, the youth seem to be developing a far more intersectional political consciousness. You saw this spontaneous flourishing of trans and queer flags in the digital server spaces.
Really?
Yeah. They were apparently arguing for an egalitarian society that tackled the contradictions of caste, class, and gender simultaneously, something Nepal's traditional political parties had largely failed to champion in any meaningful way.
So despite this digital adaptation, this shift to Discord, the movement still culminated in violence, right? Clashes on September 8th and 9th, 2025.
Yes. The state repression was severe and lethal. At least 74 people were reported killed in those clashes.
74.
And what's particularly chilling, a critical detail from the sources, are the reports that security forces were using military-grade ammunition.
Military grade. Against civilian protesters.
Specifically, 7.62 by 5.1 millimeter automatic rifle billets, the kind used in battle rifles. Using that kind of firepower against your own citizens, your own youth, it just underscores a willingness to deploy overwhelming lethal force, a complete breakdown of democratic norms.
And the protesters' anger wasn't just aimed at politicians, was it? It explicitly targeted the economic elite, the millionaire class, major corporations.
Yes, and this really confirms that radicalization we saw discussed on Discord. The protesters zeroed in on major corporations. They accused these tycoons of exploitation, of things like insurance fraud, land theft.
Specific companies were targeted.
Very specific targets. The Chaudhary Group, which is huge in Nepal, Ncell, the telecom giant, and reportedly 12 outlets of the Papateni supermarket chain were attacked.
So this wasn't just random looting.
No, the sources suggest it was targeted. It demonstrated a clear understanding among the protesters of the deep entanglement between big capital and the corrupt political system. It revealed this quite mature, radical, anti-capitalist analysis emerging directly from the streets and those digital coordination hubs.
Despite the terrible violence, the movement did achieve some tangible, immediate political wins, didn't it?
It did. Amidst the turmoil, Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli resigned. The government quickly lifted that controversial social media ban.
And policy changes, too.
Yes, the protests directly secured the cancellation of lifetime pensions for former lawmakers, a huge symbolic issue tied to that Nepo kid resentment. And they halted a plan to purchase expensive new cars for government officials.
Small victories, maybe, but highly symbolic.
Hugely symbolic. They were proof to the youth that their mobilization worked. That street pressure, coordinated digitally, could actually disrupt the self-serving financial perks of the entrenched political class. It showed their power had real consequences.
Okay, so we've looked in detail at Bangladesh, at Nepal. Now, in this next section, let's try to zoom out, connect the dots, because these events, they're clearly not happening in isolation, are they? They feel like part of something bigger, region-wide.
Exactly. Stretching across South and Southeast Asia. That term Asian Spring, it feels increasingly apt, doesn't it?
It really does.
These are interconnected struggles, driven by those shared structural issues we keep coming back to. High youth unemployment, the rising cost of living making life impossible for many, and these authoritarian or semi-authoritarian political systems that offer little accountability.
And there was a precursor event often cited.
Yes, the sources frequently point to the Sri Lankan Aragalaya in 2022 as a kind of regional trigger, or at least a powerful example.
The protests there were driven by economic collapse, right? Food and fuel shortages.
Precisely. But crucially, the Aragalaya successfully ousted Sri Lanka's leaders through mass, largely nonpartisan youth-led street mobilization. It provided a kind of working template, showing it could be done, inspiring others across the region.
This regional context is so important because it shows that Gen Z activists are learning from each other across borders. Let's bring in Indonesia now. The protests there in 2025 show how even specific, sometimes technical-sounding policies can ignite mass youth outrage.
Right. In Indonesia, the trigger was a combination of things. There were unpopular presidential policies specifically, budget cuts in some areas, supposedly to fund a big, new, free, nutritious meal program.
Okay, so maybe controversial, but with a social goal.
Yes, but that was juxtaposed against public outrage over huge, lavish allowances being granted to members of parliament.
The contrast.
Exactly. The sheer absurdity, the perceived unfairness of cutting social services, even for another social program, while politicians enrich themselves, that became the core moral grievance that fueled the protests.
And the youth response was immediate and digital.
Of course. They mobilized online using the hashtag #IndonesiaJob.
Which translates to
Dark Indonesia.
Yeah.
It conveys this real sense of despair, of fear for the country's future under these policies and this leadership. And the scale was incredible. That hashtag generated something like 14 million tweets in just 24 hours.
14 million. Just shows the viral power.
Instantaneous, widespread critique.
And then there's this fascinating cultural element unique to the 21st century. The role of K-pop fan clubs. South Korean boy band fans getting involved in political protest.
It sounds surprising, but it makes perfect sense when you think about their structure. What's really happening here is the repurposing of incredibly sophisticated pre-existing digital infrastructure.
How so?
Fan clubs for huge groups like NCT, their fans are called NCTzen or Super Junior. They are already transnational, highly organized, and incredibly adept at rapid crowdfunding and logistics. They do it all the time for album promotions, birthday projects, charity drives.
So they just shifted those skills to the protests.
Exactly. They successfully repurposed those established networks to provide tangible, on-the-ground support for the protesters. Crowdfunding for ambulances, organizing deliveries of free food, drinks, medical aid directly to protest sites.
That's amazing, showing an agility.
An agility and operational efficiency that, frankly, often surpasses what traditional NGOs or civil society groups can muster so quickly. It's a new form of solidarity network.
And Indonesian media had an interesting take on who these young protesters were, the ones the movement managed to mobilize.
Yeah, they identified them as a demographic often seen as, quote, Anglo-centric, privileged, and terminally online.
The kind of group maybe older political movements struggle to engage.
Precisely. These Gen Z movements are succeeding because they speak the cultural language of this demographic. They're meeting young people where they are online, immersed in global pop culture, and connecting that culture to political action. It bridges class and previous political apathy.
And moving further east, we see this transnational learning happening explicitly. The Philippines, September 2025.
Right, the 1 trillion peso movement. Protesting alleged massive corruption, this time linked to flood control projects, and again, those excessive allowances for officials, a recurring theme.
And the timing of the Filipino protests was very deliberate, wasn't it?
Highly strategic. They specifically chose to launch major protests on September 21st, the anniversary of Ferdinand Marcos Sr. declaring martial law back in 1972.
Using historical memory as leverage.
Exactly. Connecting past dictatorship with present-day demands for accountability and transparency. And crucially, Filipino youth leaders openly stated, according to our sources, that they learned from Nepal and Indonesia how to deploy social media effectively for rapid, coordinated action.
Direct learning across borders.
Clear evidence of it. And you see similar quick wins even in smaller nations, Timor-Leste, for example. Youth demonstrations there led directly to the government canceling a plan to buy expensive new cars for MPs. It shows this pressure is working, having immediate visible impacts on state budgets across the region.
So if we try to tie all this together, what does this common digital toolkit of the Asian Gen Z uprising look like? What are the shared elements?
Well, the key feature is the use of non-traditional, often non-national symbols. Symbols that are fluid, adaptable, and harder for states to censor because they're rooted in global pop culture.
Like the manga references.
Exactly. In Indonesia, you saw the Straw Hat Pirates, Jolly Roger flag, the symbol of freedom and rebellion from the massively popular Japanese manga One Piece, appearing at protests. Way more resonant for some youth than a traditional political party banner.
And in Thailand.
They used characters from the kids' manga Hamtaro. Youth groups adapted Hamtaro theme song lyrics to mock the government, turning political criticism into viral, humorous content. It's playful but deeply subversive.
And then there's the most iconic symbol, perhaps, the three-finger salute.
From the Hunger Games. That symbol has become truly transnational. It spread from the Thai protests, then to activists resisting the coup in Burma, Myanmar. It's even been used by exiled Cambodian politicians.
Why do these pop culture symbols work so well?
Several reasons. They're instantly recognizable to a globalized youth culture. They don't require deep knowledge of specific national political history to understand their core meaning, usually resistance against tyranny. They're also often funnier, more shareable online, and harder for states to ban outright than direct political slogans. They turn protest into culturally relevant viral content.
And this cultural sharing, this learning, it's not just random, is it? It's facilitated by frameworks like the Milk Tea Alliance.
Precisely. The Milk Tea Alliance is key here. It's not a formal organization with a headquarters or anything. It's a decentralized digital framework. A hashtag, a symbol, an online community that unites youth across borders, particularly places like Thailand, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Myanmar, India, in a collective anti-authoritarian struggle, often focused on resisting Chinese influence, but broader than that too.
How does it operate?
Through memes, through humor, through shared hashtags, through expressing solidarity online when activists in one country face crackdowns. It fosters this widespread network of digital allies that transcends national boundaries and traditional diplomatic channels.
A kind of digital counterpower.
You could call it a collective digital counter-hegemony. It uses micro-level online discourse, pop culture references, and shared symbols to build this common anti-authoritarian identity. And that makes it incredibly difficult for any single state government to contain or control. It's fluid, it's borderless, it's constantly evolving.
Wow. This has been an incredibly detailed and frankly quite sobering deep dive. Looking at the sheer scale of this mobilization, the unprecedented political outcomes. Leaders ruling for decades, overthrown in weeks.
Yeah, the synthesis is pretty clear, I think. Gen Z in Asia is actively forging a powerful collective political identity. They're showing they can move seamlessly from just criticizing online to mounting successful mass mobilizations on the ground.
But it comes at a huge cost.
A tremendous cost. And with significant internal tensions. Our sources consistently highlight the challenge of maintaining unity within these broad coalitions, like the friction we saw between religious and queer activists in Bangladesh.
And the sheer violence they face.
The extreme physical violence, including, as documented in Nepal, the state deploying military-grade weaponry against its own young citizens. That shouldn't be forgotten.
So what does all this mean for the political establishment across Asia? Especially for those regimes that have relied so heavily on censorship, on centralized control, on ignoring youth voices.
It means the game has changed. The entire political structure is under pressure, being forced to reassess. Governments aren't just dealing with predictable, organized opposition parties anymore.
They're facing something different.
They're facing a decentralized, culturally fluent, digitally native youth force that can pivot tactics instantly. A force that weaponizes irony in pop culture, that can mobilize through encrypted apps like Signal or coordination hubs like Discord when the main channels are shut down.
And they're demanding accountability.
Absolutely. They've shown they can hold the state accountable for the deep-seated corruption and human rights abuses that characterized regimes like the Awami League's long rule in Bangladesh, where things like that secret detention center and Igor were just symptoms of that profound lack of accountability. They've demonstrated that accountability can be swift, and it can be devastating for those in power.
That they've really shown that power extends far beyond just voting, doesn't it? It's in the streets, it's across every social media platform imaginable, even ones designed for gaming.
Indeed. And while this generation, Gen Z, has absolutely proven it can overthrow governments from the street, through digital organization, through non-cooperation, the really big question, the one that remains for you, the listener, to think about is this.
What comes next?
Exactly. How does this generation translate that incredible raw energy, that street power, that digital momentum into building resilient, sustainable, institutional, democratic power? Because the hard work, the really difficult climb dismantling those colonial legal structures, truly reforming the judiciary, addressing the root causes of inequality, that's the long game. That's what has to happen after the initial victory.
A really profound thought to end on. How to turn revolution into lasting reform. Thank you for guiding us through this incredible and unprecedented era of youth activism across Asia.